There's a certain principle that you need to understand before everything you want in life really starts to flow towards you. And it's called the dark principle. Now, I know it sounds pretty ominous, right? You're probably thinking, man, I'm going to click off this video now because this sounds pretty bad. Didn't come here for a horror flick. But seriously, the dark principle really is the unlock for everything to start flowing towards you. And most people just completely ignore this because, first of all, it's not very fun to hear. And second of all, they just don't understand it and how important it actually is to creating the reality that you desire. So what is this dark principle? It's simply that the darkness that you avoid and suppress ends up becoming your baseline state. So I'm sure you hear people say, it's the state that you're in on a daily basis that attracts what you want towards you. And they teach you that to stay in a high state, you need to force positivity and make sure that you're never thinking negative thoughts and basically control your life. Try as hard as you can to control what you're thinking, what you're feeling, so that you can be in a high vibe state and get everything you want effortlessly flowing towards you. Now that sounds nice, and it's really, nice to hear that, but it doesn't necessarily work. Because really what they're trying to teach you when they talk about that is trying to control and wrestle with your experience. And if you've ever discovered it for yourself how exhausting this can be, then you'll understand that when you're doing this, when you're trying to control the way life is showing up and force your mind in a particular direction, it can really feel like a state of war. And it can actually lower your state and bring you in a far lower state of being than if you were just to open up and allow what is happening now. So this is what I discovered in my early journey of understanding these teachings. I would read Abraham Hicks, I would read all the big law of attraction teachers. I read The Secret, for example. I was like, oh my God, I just have to think positive thoughts and a Ferrari will appear in my driveway. This is incredible. And it really did resonate with me. And of course, has truth to it. However, thinking positive is actually a natural state once you have dealt with the dark side of yourself. So basically what I discovered in my experience is that my mind was coming up with negativity because those are the neural pathways that I had been feeding for years. And there was a high amount of mind momentum built in that direction, right? So naturally, I was having negative emotions, negative thoughts, and then I would see these coming up and I'd be like, oh God, this is bad. I'm not supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to be positive right now. So I would try as hard as I can to force that to be other than it is and try to force some positivity over top. So my mind would be screaming, you're not going to make it. You're a loser. And then I'd be like, no, I'm confident. I'm super confident. I'm amazingly confident. I'm one of the most confident guys around this place. And this led to this really strange kind of friction where I didn't actually feel confident. I wasn't actually in a high state, but I was trying to, fake it till you make it and somehow make myself arrive there. But the shift really came when I realized that I didn't need to fight with my experience. And I truly think the fundamental basis of creating your dream life or your desired reality is really non-resistance to what is. When you can fully embrace your dark side without trying to suppress it or force some kind of positive affirmation over it, this is what begins to process this part of yourself, the dark part of yourself. Because until this darkness is allowed to come up in your conscious space and be welcomed like it would a friend, then you're still at odds with experience. And being at odds with experience, it keeps you in a low state. It's very hard to, rise up and be in a high state of being when you're constantly fearing your own mind and emotions. And that's really what this is, right? when you are monitoring for negativity and trying to force it to be positive or control it, you're actually in a constant state of fear. That, oh my God, if this thought, comes up too much, or if this emotion floods me too much, I'm going to be taken over by it, and my experience is going to go super duper negative. But this is just a fundamental misunderstanding, because it's actually the resistance to this feeling and the resistance to these thoughts that keep them amplified in your experience. Think about things around you that you don't really care if they come up, right? Let's say it's just a basic thought about, I don't know, dinner or about what you're going to do tomorrow. When that thought comes up, there's no fear. There's no amount of you being like, oh my God, I don't want this thought here. I don't want to think about dinner right now. This is terrifying. This is terrible. So what happens is the thought just naturally, it comes up. You see it, and then it just kind of fades away. You're like, oh yeah, I'll think about that later. And you just drop it. But when a fearful thought comes up, a thought that you don't feel you want to be thinking, what do is you start to argue with this thought. If you're subscribing to the old belief of control, you're saying, nope, that's not true. I'm actually super positive right now. I am super grateful, even if, something bad just happened. And so can you feel the tension in that? The war with what is? This, ironically, keeps you locked in a state of negativity. Because anything you fight, you're amplifying. What you resist persists. And it doesn't only persist, it amplifies. Why is this the case? It's because this is where your attention is flowing. And there's some real truth to that. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. If you're constantly attending to negativity, trying to change it, trying to manipulate it, trying to get it to go away, fearing it, then your intention is good in the sense of you want to be positive. You're trying to think positive thoughts and focus there. But the negativity is coming up and just overwhelming your experience. So when you completely just allow this negativity, you completely welcome the negative thoughts, the negative emotions, you stop fearing them. And you completely leave them alone in your experience without trying to fix them, change them, make them different than they are. From this place, you begin to be able to just relax into the moment and into experience. You begin to embrace the rainbow of life and the reality of what is and what is here now. Because whatever is arising in you is what it is in that moment. And like I said, anytime you fight it, you are resisting the natural ebb and flow of life, how it's showing up now. So when you start to embrace this kind of teaching of that you need to address the dark side, what really helps is to first recognize that you are not this mind that you take yourself to be. You are awareness. You are the open space of awareness that watches what the mind and emotions are doing. And from this understanding, you begin to relax back into a more open kind of space of awareness, where you become the sky, allowing these things to exist. And from this kind of standpoint, you have the ability to direct your attention the way you want it. Before this kind of awakening out of this trance of the mind where you're following all your thoughts, believing all these thoughts, you're kind of just lost to the mind. You're being pulled around in all these different directions. And this gives a lot of static to your state, right? One moment you're thinking negative, one moment you're thinking positive, then you're resisting this, you're fighting that. You're trying to force positivity here, but you're thinking negative over here. It's this kind of like jumbled mess, this like disaster. But when you discover that you're the sky, that all this arises in, you are this open space of awareness, there begins to become a space between what is happening, what is coming up, and what you actually choose to invest in. So at its core, it's that, like, when you attend to, when you give belief to and interest to negativity in your experience, that is identification with it. And that is not what I'm suggesting when I talk about allowing. When I talk about allowing, I'm talking about bringing an open space towards it without trying to change or suppress it in any way, but also not necessarily engaging in it and following it and believing in it either. The best way to describe it is that you're just leaving it alone. Like you would leave anything alone in your normal life, right? You don't try to change the trees. You don't try to change the water. Someone comes into the room that you don't like. You don't try to, like, push them and make them go away. And you also don't go up to them and start arguing with them either. If someone comes in the room that you don't like, you just leave them alone, and eventually they will go away. And this is the exact same thing when it comes to our mind and emotions. So when you understand the dark principle, which I literally just made up off the top of my head, it's a principle now because I made it up. Once you understand this principle that by addressing the negativity and addressing the dark, it's actually highly positive, a highly positive thing to do. This will really start to raise your state because you are processing and dealing with, and by processing I just mean allowing, the negativity to be as it is. You're becoming welcoming to it, which begins to process it, and naturally you start to move to a higher and higher state of being. And in this state, positivity becomes far more effortless because you're not fighting this big, wave of, or this like rushing river of negativity. You start to still into more calm waters where it's much easier to direct your mind in a positive direction. But before you really address this, what I'm talking about, the negativity, it has a lot of momentum, right? There's a lot of momentum built up from past identification and fuel with this negativity. And so trying to control your inner state from this place of being pulled around by the mind, trying to suppress your emotions, being like, oh no, I gotta think positive or else something bad's gonna happen. This is an inherently low state to be, and very, very hard to get results from this place. Hope this helped.